The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 15th chapter. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Any young ones with us this morning? I don't see any. Zekers was having some trouble when I came over, so I wasn't sure he'd be here either. So, yeah, maybe we should add him to our prayers. We'll see. Let me start this morning by saying you should read Luther's article on the Sixth Commandment. QR code, of course, is there in your bulletin for you. It's very good. It's very short. However, he made his point so well that he basically changed the world. And the thing that he talks about most in this article on the Sixth Commandment is something we really don't have a lot of issue with. Now, he does speak of the general things that we associate with the Sixth Commandment. That's you shall not commit adultery. So he does talk some about general sexual immorality and such. But he has kind of a focus on the fact that marriage was held in very little regard in his day, since celibacy for holiness' sake was held in higher regard. And due to his writings and others who followed after him, our society's changed. We stopped looking on celibate, monks and celibate nuns as necessarily having the highest form of holiness in all the world, and recognized that marriage was a holy estate of its own. What I would like to do, however, is still keep the idea of a good, solid, faithful marriage relationship in order to teach what many consider to be kind of a difficult lesson in Scripture that's reflected in our second lesson for today. And I want to call being in a solid marriage relationship being stuck in the middle with someone, with any due apologies to Steelers Wheel, whose classic has very little to do with why I chose that particular phrase. But a good solid relationship can be called being stuck in the middle with someone. If you consider the middle, the better ground between two extremes. One extreme is pure faithlessness, what you normally think of as, you shall not commit adultery being all about, in any kind of extramarital affairs, any kind of, extramarital sexual activity, from lust in the heart that comes with pornography and other forms of misuse of God's gift of sexuality, right on down the line. That would be one form of not being in a solid marriage relationship. And another form, on the other extreme, is the thing that people who are afraid of marriage often talk about. They'll talk about folks that, they're following all the rules. They found someone to get married to, and they established a household, and they've been faithful to each other for years, but the marriage is cold. It's lifeless. It's heartless. They don't talk to each other. They're strangers in the same house. A solid relationship would be in the middle of those two, right? So that's what I mean by stuck in the middle. And we can use that image to understand what Paul is talking about in Romans chapter 11. What Paul is talking about, it takes the shape of looking at God's relationship with Israel as kind of a strange on-again, off-again relationship. And the Israelites, they had a history of cheating, so that's one extreme, right? Way over to the left, you got the history of cheating on God that the Israelites were known for, that the prophets were complaining about throughout the Old Testament. They were godless at times. They were sometimes idolatrous. They were following false gods and attributing to either their own strength, which is godlessness, or to the help of these false gods, the success that they were having in life. But at the same time, the Jews of Paul's day were well known for being incredibly religious and dedicated to God's temple. And the mystery that Paul is picking up and trying to talk about and explain is that you can kind of understand the Jews of Hosea's day. By the way, Hosea is a good book to read if you want to understand the framing of Israel as a cheating spouse, right? So it's about 13 chapters, not too hard to read. It's a really good one. But those Jews of Hosea's day, you can kind of understand missing the Messiah if he were to arrive. But the incredibly religious Jews of Paul's day, the ones so incredibly devoted to the temple that they had fought wars to stay independent in their religion, they had fought and talked Rome to a standstill in order to make them an accepted religion in what was not a religiously tolerant empire. Right? So they were a legal religion because they fought hard for it. How can that people miss the Messiah when he arrives? So Paul asks, is it that God has finally rejected his people after all those centuries of faithlessness and spiritual cheating? So I ask then, he says, verse 1, I ask then, did God reject his people? And immediately he answers, by no means. I'm an Israelite myself, right? So he's a Jew. And he is stuck in the middle with Jesus. If we want to use our phrasing from before. I'm a Jew myself, descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people whom he foreknew. So think again. What is in the middle with Jesus? Where is Paul? All right, you've got clowns to the left, being completely faithless toward God, and possibly chasing after other gods. You've got jokers to the right. I kept saying this wasn't going to have anything to do with the Steelers Wheel song, but here it is again. And you've got jokers to the right. Those are the ones who have turned religion with God into a certain set of rules that they know they can follow, and then they look at all the others outside those rules and say, you're the faithless ones who need to listen in. And again, it's like a marriage, right? Those chasing folks around, and those living at home but not connecting with their spouse, putting no heart into it. Now in marriage, you can say the middle looks like this, or at least I recently heard a marriage counselor say that marriage in the middle looks like this. He had spent his career, listening to married couples try to, fight it out in front of him. And he noticed that in marriages where the husband was successful, so maybe it's a marriage that was going to last, or maybe after listening to them argue for a while, he said, I don't think the woman is really trying. He noticed a pattern in behavior. He said the husbands of successful relationships always dedicated at least 15 minutes a day. And I don't just mean they happened to do it. I mean they dedicated time, 15 minutes a day, to listening to their spouse. Listening. And they had 5 to 10 minutes a day for each kid. That doesn't sound like a lot of time, But those of us who have been married might want to, look to the left or right and apologize a little bit, because that doesn't happen every day. But that's being in the middle. Listening to your spouse. That's what it is to not be to the left with the completely faithless and to the right with the legalistically faithless. In the middle, growing a powerful, lasting relationship. So isn't it interesting then that last week we read Romans 10 and learned that the context of Romans 11, this difficult lesson about, did God reject his people in the end? Romans 10 is the famous passage of Scripture about faith coming from, remember? Faith comes from hearing the message. And Paul explains that with a couple of Old Testament passages right after he says that. Passages that essentially say, it's not that the message didn't go out, it's that the people were contrarian and not listening. They weren't listening. Those who recognized the Messiah. The big difference, Jesus himself said, was not whether they saw or heard or understood the message, but whether they heard and took it to heart, whether they were listening and let it sink in. And here's where you really begin to see the faithfulness of God, and I hope from listening to this, you find new encouragement to grow in your relationship with him, to get past any stubbornness and not listening to him, because no matter how stubborn we are, no matter what we do that counts as faithlessness, he will not give up. That is his character, and this is what Paul is explaining. Now, you can see the verses are kind of broken up. We got 13 to 15, and then we got 28 to 32, and I do encourage you to read the whole chapter, but I think they did a good job of selecting verses that give you the general flow of thought. But looking at verses 13 to 15, so what happened? Did God reject his people? No. I'm talking to you Gentiles, he says, inasmuch as I'm the apostle of the Gentiles, because, he's a Jew, but he's been out of Israel for a long time, sharing this gospel of Jesus Christ with all the world. Inasmuch as I'm the apostle of the Gentiles, I take pride in my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. For if their rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So he's happy that the rest of the world is coming to Christ and that his preaching is contributing to that. That's great. He loves that. You read the other readings from today, and they're about the rest of the nations coming to God, right? But Paul's got a big problem. He comes from the nation that was chosen first. The nation where you could see the special action of God to draw people into his kingdom. And they largely rejected the Messiah when he came. So he says in verses 28 and following, as far as the gospel is concerned, they're enemies for your sake. Because the rest of the Gentiles got a chance through the rejection of the Israelites to hear more about Jesus. In fact, the spread of Christianity in the early years, I'm sure you've heard, was largely in part due to persecution, right? And then you hear about the persecutions of the Roman Empire, but it didn't start with persecution of the Roman Empire, did it? It started with persecution by God's people toward the Christians. After all, they tried to kill him to stop this whole thing. When he rose from the dead and people started following him anymore, they didn't go, well, we tried, let's follow him. No, persecution started in Israel, and that started the spread. Right? So they're enemies for your sake. But as far as election is concerned, God's choices, They are loved on account of the patriarchs, for God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. Just as you who were at one time disobedient to God have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience, so they too have now become disobedient in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. For God has bound everyone over to disobedience one way or another, right? Everyone's disobedient at some point, so that he may have mercy on them all. So it's like this. You think of the faithful marriage. If you're in the middle, if both spouses are in the middle, things are absolutely beautiful. We hear stories about that, it makes us cry. But not even God expects the spouse who has been cheated against to stay in that marriage. Jesus says that himself, right? Could happen. You could heal that. It's more like a recommitment than, a continuing marriage. But Jesus knows what happens when one spouse cheats. It breaks things. It takes a lot to get that back. God, on the other hand, he chose us. This is the election God was talking about. Everyone who hears the gospel can say this about themselves because they heard the gospel. Ephesians starts with that thought. If you've heard the gospel, you can say this about yourself. I was chosen to hear the gospel. History works such that I get to hear the gospel and turn to God. I'm elect. But if you've been around long enough, like the Israelites were around a long time with the election of God, you start to realize something about that election. God knows me so well that he has done some somewhat embarrassing things in order to have me. He suffers dishonor to have me. People know me well, and then they find out that I'm a pastor. They're like, oh, what? Are we talking about the same Aaron Frey? I didn't even know that guy had a Bible. My classmates actually said that when I went back to my well, it wasn't my high school reunion, it was my friends that I knew from middle school, but I happened to be at their high school reunion one year. They asked me to pray, and after I prayed, I had multiple old classmates come up and say, that was a nice prayer. Were you a Christian when I knew you? God chose that guy. That embarrassment. All those people knew that this guy is now in a pulpit, and if God is all-knowing, what kind of God is that? Does he not know who he chose? But God's going to do some embarrassing things. Some things that cause him dishonor. But it's because he takes such delight in you. Knowing everything he knows about you, he still takes such delight in you that he's going to go ahead. He's going to take on that embarrassment. He is going to choose a history in which he is cheated on again and again and again and again. He's going to choose a history where people hear his voice, and then turn it into a bunch of rules that they think should impress him if they keep it. They might even turn those rules into a way of looking at everybody else in the world and saying, I listen to him, why don't you? I'm not the problem, you are. Well, God goes, you're not listening right now! Does that sound enough like a spousal argument? Yeah. But it doesn't stop him. His faithfulness is such that knowing everything about you and all the ways in which you have turned in the past and may turn in the future, he wants you. This is what it means to be in the middle with God. And I encourage you, brothers and sisters, to grow from that faithfulness, from His faithfulness. To realize that there's no better way to live. All those clowns on the left being faithless and running around, they think they're having a good time. They're actually just destroying their lives. All those jokers on the right, that are following the rules and putting everybody else down because they're not living the kingdom. Rejoice in God's faithfulness. Rejoice in His choice of you. Let people see that joy exude from you, even if they know your past. You could even sing, "Happy to be stuck with you," I guess. I remember when my mom heard that song. I was a Huey Lewis and the News fan back in the day, and she's like, "What an awful song." And I'm like, no, I don't think you get it. Maybe she gets it better now. I don't know. You can sing that. You can sing these hymns that sound so wonderful and think to yourself, I'm stuck with God. And that's a good thing. Because no matter what I do, He sticks to me. That is divine fulfillment, and that lasts forever. Amen. Please stand.